Okay, so back to it. The next part I'm going to talk about is Jesus a myth? Okay, because that's just going around like wildfire. Okay, so other religions have him as just a prophet, you know. But the thing is that Jesus is mentioned in more areas, documented in more areas than just the Bible. Okay, and I'm going to hit on that just a little bit here. Okay, and this is going to play into the doubt thing too. And I went to it's called Compelling Truth website, and it talks about, is Jesus a myth? And it says, is Jesus a myth? In other words, is there credible evidence that Jesus of Nazareth, sorry, I'm trying to like get my cat off the chair. Okay, cat's now gone. So anyway, evidence that Jesus of Nazareth historically exists, or is the Christian version of Jesus a copy of pagan gods of other religions? Robert Price, author of Deconstructing Jesus, and a member of the controversial Jesus Seminar, that's a whole different area I'm not even going to get into, has been an outspoken apologist for the mythical Jesus. In his words, we will never know whether Jesus existed unless someone discovers his diary or skeleton. But this is not the whole story. Many lines of evidence become a personal journal. Beyond a personal journal or a corpse are typically used to verify historical accounts. A look at these lines of historical and agricultural evidence reveals there is actually significant evidence for much of what is recorded concerning the life of Jesus of Nazareth. First, this is what they say. We have 27 letters written during the lifetimes of Jesus' closest followers that provide a wealth of information regarding the life, teachings, and miracles of Jesus. One of these, 4 are the Gospels' accounts of his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. 2 of these, Matthew and John, were written by men who were disciples of Jesus, while Mark was recorded by a man who served closely with the Apostle Peter. According to early church history, the 4th gospel writer, Luke, claims to have written his gospel as a result of compelling the evidence from his time among eyewitnesses, and other written records, and was published most likely in the 1660 ADs, approximately 30 years from the time of the actual events. Okay, his prologue in Luke 1 through 4 reads, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken the compile of narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us," this is bolded here, "just as those of who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them among us. It seems good to me also, having followed all things closely from some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things we have been taught." Okay. Many, however, have objected to the New Testament accounts are biased and inaccurate. Yet the external evidence shows that approximately 5,800 handwritten Greek manuscripts exist. Greek was the original language of the New Testament, offering significantly more early copies than any other ancient work. In comparison, the Iliad by Homer, one of the greatest works of ancient literature, stands in second place with just 643 ancient manuscripts. In addition, there are a high degree of accuracy among these thousands of early manuscripts. Researchers note that as much as 99.5% of the New Testament is accurately preserved. Okay? So, on that note, the next question to consider is whether this early information from the New Testament is accurate. A wide variety of scholarly sources confirm many details mentioned in the New Testament. These writers include Josephus, Lucian, Pliny the Younger, and Jewish Talmud, among others. The late New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce notes the following summary of events verified in extra-biblical documents, not the Bible. In his work, Jesus and Jewish Origins Outside of the New Testament. And this is the list, that he talks about. Jesus lived during the time of Tiberius and Caesar. He lived a victorious life. He was a wanderer worker. He had a brother named James. He was acclaimed to be the Messiah. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. An eclipse and earthquake occurred when he died. He was crucified on the eve of Jewish Passover. His disciples believed he rose from the dead. His disciples were willing to die for their belief. Christianity spread rapidly as far as Rome, and his disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped Jesus as God. In fact, the New Testament scholar Gary Habermas notes, altogether, there are even about 12 non-Christian sources that mention Jesus within the first 150 years of his death. A full list of discussion of these sources are available in the book, The Historical Jesus. Archaeology, on this note, provides even additional strength regarding the New Testament's accuracy. As noted, and when skeptics ask by Norman Glusher and Ronald Brooks, many inscriptions and locations from the gospel accounts have been discovered, including references to Pilate, the man who condemned Jesus to death, Bethlehem, the city of Jesus' birth, Nazareth, the city where Jesus was raised, and the home of Pilate in Jerusalem. But is there any way in which the information we have been given in the New Testament about Jesus is a result of pagan religion influences? Again, the accusation does not fit the facts. Two compelling reasons support this. To begin, the first pagan religion to include a resurrection account that we know of did not exist until the 2nd century after death. As such, the pagan religion connections alleged to serve as the basis for the life and the works of Jesus came after Jesus and the writings of the apostles' accounts. That's important to remember. That's fact. Proven fact. Second, even if it could be proven that these pagan accounts existed before the earthly life of Jesus, and they cannot be proven, these similarities would not necessarily mean they were borrowed or copied. The only way this could be proven would be to provide examples of specific connections that show the New Testament writers used specific pagan religions recorded in their narratives of the life of Jesus, something that cannot be shown based on existing evidence. All of these historical facts, they're summing it up here, make a strong case that Jesus of the New Testament lived, came to the popularity during the time of Herod, was put to death on the Roman cross under the authority of Pilate, and that his followers taught that Jesus was alive again, quickly resulting in the spread of Christianity across the Roman Empire. As far as finding the corpse of Jesus, if the message of Scripture is true, then it would never be found to provide 100% DNA evidence because Jesus is alive, not dead. This is not a myth, but a miracle, and one that proves Jesus was the Messiah, the Son, the risen Son of God. There's so much proof out there right now that this all happened. There's TV shows out there now. It drives me batty, and I've actually just stopped watching them because you have to walk away from it all. The Bible even warns us about false doctrines, false teachers, false prophets, people coming and saying that he's their Christ. We have to walk away from it. We have to guard our hearts against it. These TV shows about depicting the Bible and myths of the Bible, and it's all man-made based form. I mean, it's another form of the enemy to denounce God. And that's where we have to be very careful. Okay, because God will take his grace away. There will be a time when it's too late. Either being a death, or if we are the generation living in the end of time, we have to prepare ourselves with the truth. All right, so on that note, I'm going to get into a little bit of what he did on earth while he was here. What miracles did he perform? And why he performed those miracles. Okay? There's so much connection in the Bible. I mean, we have stuff in the Old Testament, okay? Prophecy, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Elijah. We have so many, Daniel, I mean, it goes on and on and on. And then the Old Testament comes along, been proven. We have documentation, we have proof that it all came to pass. Okay, so we're going to start off. What miracles did Jesus perform? According to the gospel accounts, okay, now you have to remember these are just some accounts, and John explains it very well. Okay, he basically says, if I listed every single miracle Jesus did, there would be books and books and books and books. But the miracles had a purpose to build faith. He didn't come here just to do all the miracles. He came here to do the miracles for a reason. Okay, so let's go through some of these miracles real quick, okay? Jesus changed water into wine. John 2:1-11. Jesus cured the nobleman's son. The great haul of fish. Jesus cast out an unclean spirit. Jesus cured Peter's mother-in-law of a fever. Jesus healed a leopard. Jesus healed the centurion's servant just because he had faith. And he was a Gentile. So, you know, he did come across Gentiles on his time on earth that believed him. Jesus raised the widow's son from the dead. Jesus stilled the storm. Jesus cured 2 demonics. Cured a paralytic, raised the ruler's daughter from the dead, cured a woman of an issue of blood. He opened the eyes of 2 blind men, one from birth. All right. Jesus loosened the tongue of a man who could not speak. Jesus healed an invalid man at the pool of Bethesda. Jesus restored a withered hand. That was in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And I'm going to get into the Sabbath healings too, and there's a reason I'm going to talk about that. Jesus cured a demon-possessed man. Jesus fed at least 5,000 people from 2 fish and 5 loaves of, I think it's barley bread. He healed a woman of Canaan. Canaanite, where they were Jewish. Israel and Canaan, they were enemies. I mean, Israel came and conquered back the land of Canaan. All right, so he healed. She wasn't from what the understanding is, she didn't believe she was Jewish or an Israelite. Jesus cured a deaf and mute man, fed at least 4,000 people, opened the eyes of another blind man, cured a boy who was plagued by a demon, opened the eyes of a man born blind, cured a woman who had been afflicted 18 years, cured a man of dropsy, cleansed 10 lepers, raised Lazarus from the dead, caused the fig tree to wither, restored the ear of the high priest's servant when Peter severed it when they captured him in the garden, rose from the dead, that's a big one, the second great haul of fishes. All right, so now we're going to get a little bit more into the Sabbath healings, okay? Because the Jewish belief of Sabbath is from the Mosaic rules that Moses gave from God. Okay, and in the New Testament, over and over and over and over again, the laws weren't working. Okay, and it's stated in the Bible that it was said the Sabbath was made for man, not the man for the Sabbath. Okay, God rested. He wanted us to take time to be in His presence, to worship Him with no outside influences, to strengthen ourselves on this earth because it's that hard and He knows it. He can't be around it, but He knows it. Okay, so let's get into the Sabbath real quick, because they weren't supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. They couldn't pick up beds, they couldn't clean, they couldn't walk, they couldn't, nothing could be done. And that's why the high priests, the Pharisees were so angry and calling him, the devil, because he was healing people on the Sabbath. That's a sin, you blasphemer. Okay, so it says here on icogsfg.org. It's actually a great little article, so that's kind of why I hit on it. So, Jesus performed many miracles during His ministry. Jesus was very compassionate to people as much as His time was spent in the act of healing. But when Jesus knew it, He withdrew from there because it started and it gets into here about how he kept like leaving these mobs of people because they were missing the point of the healings. And I'm going to get into that in a second, okay? Jesus did so many miracles that the Bible doesn't record them all. The last verse of the apostle in the Gospel of John says, "And there are so many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written." So the man was healing thousands and thousands of people at a time. Okay, so that needs to be remembered too. So let's take a brief look at the 7 miracles that Jesus performed on the Sabbath and see what we glean from them. Okay, because these are important. These are important miracles that happened on the sacred Sabbath that even today Israel and the Jewish belief still does. Okay, and there's a reason I'm talking about this, and I'll get to that connection here in just a little bit. Okay, Jesus heals a lame man from by the pool of Bethesda. I'm going to read the verse, okay, and then we'll get into the notary after that. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now, there in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate at a pool, which is called the Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. Now they believed that this pool had angels were stirring the waters. Okay, and it was healing water. And so that's why people went there. Okay, because there were certain times of the day that the waters would start moving, and they believed that the angels were moving the water to heal you. So he sees this man, infirmity that he had 38 years. When Jesus saw him laying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said unto him who was cursed, "Is this the Sabbath? It is not lawful for anyone to carry their bed." Because, carrying anything, doing any physical labor, pretty much they couldn't do. Okay, that's the law of Sabbath. He answered them, He who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk. And they asked him, who is the man who said thus to you, take up your bed and walk? But the one who had healed him did not know who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you have made me well, sin no more. Oh, see, you have been made well, sin no more, lest a wrong thing can come upon you. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason, Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. Because Jesus answered him, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal to God. And that's in John 5:1-8. Notice, now this is what they say, they break this down. Notice at the time that Jesus had only healed one person out of the great multitude of sick people. Verse 3. Notice also that Jesus told the man to do 3 things. Rise, take up your bed and walk. Jesus healed the man and he was able to rise and stand as healthy human being. The healed man was to pick up his bedroll and do not leave it at the pool at Bathsheba and walk, and man was to walk. Where did the man walk to? He walked to the temple and he probably went there to praise God. Okay, because that's where God was. Well, was supposed to be. God for healing his infirmity of 38 years. When the man was walking, the Jews saw him carrying the bed, and they got mad at him because he was doing something of a physical labor. The Jews had their oral law, and this law was later put in writing form, and it was called Mishan. The Jews had built a hedge around the Sabbath with their oral law in which they were trying not to break the Sabbath. The reason they did this was twofold. Years earlier, they had disobeyed God for profaning God's Sabbath and worshiping idols, and God had then carried them carried away to Babylon captivity for 70 years. Okay, I was actually going to start doing a 70-year teaching, but I'm going to try and put something like that together and maybe do something like that. But, you know, they were exiled because they weren't doing the Sabbaths. You know, there was how it's taught, and I'm going to get on a side note of this, is that they were supposed to harvest the land for 6 years. Okay, and then on the 7th year, because he was going to make the land so plentiful for them for 6 years, all right, on the 7th year, they were supposed to not reap. They were not to harvest nothing. I mean, they could go and eat the fruit that grew naturally, but they weren't supposed to harvest it all. Okay, they never did that for, I think it's like, it calculated as like 460 years. They didn't do that. Okay, so adding up all those Sabbaths, every 7th Sabbath year, that 7th year, they had to let the land rest. Okay, there was a reason that's his land. They didn't do it. So what happened? They were kicked out. And they were taken to Babylon. All right, so that's why they were so, in Jesus' time, they were so adamant about keeping the Sabbath because they didn't want to upset God again. Okay, but by that time they started taking it out of content so much so that that's why the point that all this is going to be, and I'll get to it in a second too more, is that Jesus was showing them that I'm the Sabbath. God, you're missing the point of the Sabbath. Okay, you need to rest, you need to heal, you need to recuperate, you need to be with him, be in his glory, be in his word. Okay, so anyway, the Sabbath day journey is also a part of, I'm going to pronounce some of these words because they're in Hebrew, so Mishnah, and it's calculated to be 2,000 cubits, approximately 3,000 feet in a radius from the dwelling place, and a strict line in the distance would be doubled. So they're not supposed to walk a certain length on the Sabbath either, okay? Now let's go back to the passage regarding the healed lame man. Jesus told the man to do three things: raise, walk to the bed. These three commands: raise, take up your bed, and walk. Three things. Okay, these three commands were forbidden by the Jews on the Sabbath. To rise indicated that Jesus healed the man. Healing was forbidden on the Sabbath. Carrying your bed and walking more than the Sabbath's day journey was forbidden on the Sabbath. Okay, Jesus healed the lame man on the Sabbath. And he did it as a direct provocation of the laws that the Jews had established. Jesus did this to expand our knowledge of the Sabbath. Just like I was saying, the Sabbath is to be pleasant and positive, a time to do good. It is not to be a bunch of strict Pharisaical legal rules that would make the Sabbath a yoke of bondage. Okay, that's why he said the Sabbath was made for man, not man made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath pictures freedom. Jesus healed the lame man and gave him freedom and liberty from his infirmity and affliction. And that's what the Sabbath, the day of rest, is supposed to be. Joy and celebrating God and being with God. They had become so rulistic, so embedded in law and rule that it wasn't even, the points were gone. All right. Now notice verse 16. For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. Jesus was doing good, and the Pharisees, chief priests, and the scribes hated him for it. Verse 18, therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, but he also said that God was his Father, making himself equal to God. Jesus did not break the Sabbath. He obeyed God's law and was perfect and without sin, Hebrews 4:15. And he kept the Sabbath as it should be kept. The law was broken by the Jews' oral law, with all of its restrictions. Jewish religious leaders also hated Jesus because he said he was that God was his Father. Another whole issue. Anyway, the second miracle, Jesus drives out the evil spirit. So he did this, okay? And that's Mark 1. I'm not going to read the whole scripture because I'll just keep going on. Mark 1, 21 through 28, and you can look that up. And so they break it down. Basically, they were in Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he was in the synagogue, and he was teaching in the synagogue because it was the Sabbath. That's what they do on the Sabbath. They go in the synagogue. And while they were in the synagogue, this guy came in with an evil spirit in him, okay? And it says, what did Jesus do on the Sabbath? He entered the synagogue and taught. The Sabbath is special to Jesus because he is the Lord and the master of it. And Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. I keep repeating that, okay? Therefore, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. Notice that the Sabbath was made for man, not just the Jews. Jesus was the creator of all things, John 1 through 3. And he created the Sabbath and made it holy, Genesis 2, 2 through 3. All right, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. He could do whatever he wanted to on the Sabbath. He was God. Okay? Why did Jesus teach in the synagogue? He taught with authority. Okay? Authority is a key word in this passage. Authority involves testimony. Being an expert, having influence and power, a person in command, a governmental agency. Jesus is all of these. His testimony relates to him being the Word of God. John 1, 1 through 3. Jesus being the creator of the universe, because he is God, of God, okay? God is the creator of the universe. He is an expert in all things. In this passage, Jesus showed that he had the power and influence over unclean, evil, demonic spirit in this man. Jesus rebuked it and said, be quiet and come out of him. And the spirit obeyed. In the future, Jesus will be head of the earth's governmental agency as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Revelation 17:14. Notice in verse 27 that the people or amazed at Jesus' authority. Jesus has authority over all things, Ephesians 3:9, including the earthly elements of wind, water, and storms, Matthew 8:27. Jesus is our healer, Isaiah 53, Old Testament, 5. 1 Peter 2:24, New Testament. And his authority over our well-being, including sickness, fever, and demonic spirits. Jesus also has the authority over Satan, the devil. When Jesus went to the wilderness for 40 days, and after he was tempted by the devil 3 times, Jesus said, "Away with you, Satan." And the devil obeyed and left him immediately. He's over everything. He commands all. He's greater than anything. 1 John, you children, for who is within you is greater than who is on the earth. That's huge. That should put doubt to shame just with that verse. But we still doubt. Anyway. Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. This is also on the Sabbath. Mark 1:29 through 31. I'm not going to get that one. Jesus heals a man with a deformed hand. And this actually happened, I believe, also in the synagogue. Okay, this is Mark 3:1 through 6. Now, when he did this, okay, the Pharisees, chief priests, and scribes watched him closely. They expected Jesus to heal this man, and they wanted to accuse him, saying, "You're doing this on the Sabbath," okay? It is hard to understand their hardcore legalism against doing good. And I talked about legalism a little bit in that little short video I did, Pondering Faith. So legalism is just horrible to faith. It is, because it's Satan. It's all the bad coming into you. You're not doing good enough. Or in their mind, you are not curtailing to the laws of Moses that God gave him. Okay? Illegalism against doing good on the Sabbath. The Jews had more love for their animals than for people who had life-threatening sicknesses, afflictions, and infirmities. The Jews would water their animals and help them out of a ditch on the Sabbath. Luke 13:15, 14, and 5. But they resented Jesus, who would help people out of a ditch by healing them of some kind of affliction. In verse 4, Jesus asks, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill?" Jesus is showing that the Sabbath is a day of love, a day to love God and to love and serve our fellow man, and by doing good to your neighbor. Religion to the Jewish religious leaders was ritual, obeying rules and regulations. The law, the oral law, that was more important to them than God. They took God out of the entire equation. Okay. Jesus heals a man born blind. John 9, 1 through 16. Now this one is interesting. Okay, it says this is the only miracle in the Gospels in which the suffering man is said to be afflicted from his birth. There was a common belief that at the time that sin caused health problems, but notice what Jesus said was the real reason for the beggar's blindness, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. Why did Jesus make clay with saliva? He probably did it to provoke Jewish religious leaders, since they would consider him doing work on the Sabbath, because saliva back then, I just read this a little while ago, saliva was used in healing back then. Okay, and there's a couple of times that Jesus used saliva for like the deaf man, the blind man. He would use his saliva because that was a ritual that the Jewish people did back then. Okay, so he's, I don't know, I mean, sometimes I think he was enjoying this, but I'm sure he wasn't. I mean, he's all holy and we have sadistic sense of humor sometimes, but he was showing this as this, I'm God's the Sabbath, not the law. Okay? And now remember, this should be building up your faith, hearing all of this stuff, even all the stuff that I've read to you. This should be filling up your faith and diminishing your doubt. And that's what studying in Scripture and in the Word, in the Bible, you know, that's what it's all about. That's how we get rid of the doubt. and the fear and the anxiety and all this other stuff. Okay? We're putting on our armor of God. We're buffing it up every time we're in the Word. Okay? All right, so to finish this up, it says, there is a song in the hymn called Stand Up for Jesus. And then exactly what the healed man was doing. He was witnessing for Jesus, because he had gone to the leaders, and leaders asked him, like, you weren't blind. And everybody was like, yeah, he was. We knew him. People around there that knew who he was. He'd been blind since he was born. All right, they said this is about Jesus. He liked to get in their faces and show them their faults and hypocrisy, and calling them hypocrites, Matthew 23.